I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. You wake up on a Saturday morning, you stroll into your kitchen to grab some breakfast, and you notice your box of cereal has been knocked over.
A pretty standard morning, honestly.
Right, but the spilled cereal letters on the table aren't just a random scattered mess. They perfectly spell out, take out the garbage, dash, mom. Now, would you assume a minor earthquake rattled the house in just the right way to form that specific sentence?
No. Definitely not.
Or maybe the cat knocked the box over in a stroke of absolute grammatical genius. Of course not. You instantly know what happened. Your mom left you a deliberate message.
Yeah, that immediate recognition is universal. I mean, our brains just instinctively differentiate between a random accident and a deliberate, intelligent act. And that specific instinct, how we recognize design and information, is the focal point of what we are exploring today. Welcome to our deep dive.
Today we are venturing into a highly debated, really philosophically charged text. We are unpacking excerpts from authors Geisler and Turek, specifically looking at their arguments concerning the origin of the first life.
Right, their core mission here is to lay out a case for intelligent design over naturalistic Darwinism.
Yes. But before we jump into the deep end, we absolutely need to establish a very crucial disclaimer.
We do. Our goal in this deep dive is not to take sides or to endorse the viewpoints presented in this text.
At all.
Right. The origin of life is an incredibly complex, deeply contested issue with very passionate advocates on all sides. We are here purely to impartially report, distill, and examine the core ideas, the analogies, and the philosophical arguments contained within the original source material.
We're basically taking the puzzle pieces provided by the authors and just laying them out on the table for you. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
The authors actually use a variation of that spilled cereal scenario I just mentioned to set up their entire premise. They tell this anecdote about a teenager named Johnny who desperately wants to avoid his chores. Naturally. He walks into the kitchen, sees the cereal spelling out, take out the garbage, Mom, and decides to weaponize his high school biology class logic.
Oh, I love this part.
It's so good. He essentially tells himself that, hey, since life itself is considered the product of mindless natural laws, why couldn't this message just be the product of an earthquake? He actively ignores the obvious implication because he just wants to go to the beach to see a girl named Mary.
And the denial continues right onto the beach.
Yeah.
Because he gets there and he sees Mary walking with his rival, Scott. He looks down and sees a heart drawn in the sand with Mary loves Scott inside it.
Brutal.
Yeah, but Johnny doubles down. He tries to convince himself that maybe an unusual wave pattern or, I don't know, some really coordinated sand crabs naturally produce the love note.
Right, it's a funny illustration of motivated reasoning, but the authors are using it to trap the reader into a specific logical framework. Johnny finally breaks his denial when he looks up and sees a skywriting plane leaving the fluffy white message, "Drink Coke."
Yeah, he realizes natural swirling winds have literally never been observed to create a commercial slogan. So the underlying concept the authors are establishing here is what they call specified complexity. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot in information theory, but in this context, it is crucial.
Break that down for us. What makes it specified?
Well, when we look at the phrase drink Coke, it's not just that the cloud formations are complex. I mean, a random jagged mountain range is complex.
Sure.
The difference is that the letters convey an independent specific message. They contain functional information. Complex things can happen by natural laws, but the authors argue that specified complexity, meaning an intelligible message, always points to a mind.
Always.
Right.
Let's pivot and apply that framework to biology because this is where the text makes its biggest leap. The authors transition from alphabet cereal to the microscopic world. Specifically, DNA.
Right, the building blocks.
Yeah, we all know DNA uses a four-letter genetic alphabet, A, T, C, and G. But the authors push back hard against the idea that these are just chemicals reacting.
Under their framework, those four bases function identically to a written language. The specific sequence of those letters determines exactly how a living organism is built and how it operates. And the text highlights a staggering metric to put this in perspective.
This blew my mind when I read it.
It is wild. If you look at a single one-celled amoeba, which evolutionary biology often categorizes as a simple early life form, its DNA contains a massive volume of specified information.
Yeah.
If you were to literally spell out all the A, T, C, and G letters in the DNA of just one single amoeba,
Just one.
it would fill 1,000 complete sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica.
1,000 full encyclopedias of data inside a microscopic single-celled organism. That is insane.
And the text poses a very direct challenge here.
Yeah.
If a short, simple message like "drink Coke" unequivocally requires an intelligent pilot to create it,
Right.
on what logical grounds do we assume that a meticulously ordered functional message equivalent to 1,000 encyclopedias was written by mindless natural laws?
Which forces a real confrontation with how we define evidence in the first place. Which brings up a structural problem in origin of life research that the authors emphasize. No one was there to observe it.
Exactly. The emergence of the first living cell was a one-time, unrepeatable historical event. You can't just put the primordial Earth in a test tube and watch it happen again.
So scientists have to play detective. They have to rely on forensic principles, analyzing the evidence left behind today to reconstruct a past they never actually witnessed.
And the central tool in that forensic toolbox is the principle of uniformity.
Which is?
It's the principle that dictates we must assume causes in the past look like causes we observe in the present. If a specific effect requires a specific cause today, we assume it required that same exact cause a billion years ago.
Okay, that makes sense. The text uses a great visual contrast to make this concrete for you. The Grand Canyon versus Mount Rushmore.
A classic example.
Yeah, we confidently conclude that natural laws, specifically water and wind erosion, carved the Grand Canyon. Why? Because we can go out into the world right now and observe water eroding rock and carving channels.
The principle of uniformity holds up perfectly there.
But Mount Rushmore is a totally different story.
Right, because we have never, in any setting, observed natural elements chiseling highly detailed, proportional faces of historical figures into solid granite.
Never.
The only time we observe that kind of specified complexity taking shape, there's a sculptor involved, an intelligent mind. Therefore, the principle of uniformity actually demands we attribute Mount Rushmore to an intelligent cause.
And the authors argue that this exact same logic must be applied to the first cell.
Exactly. If we have never observed natural, unguided laws spontaneously generating the equivalent of 1,000 encyclopedias of functional code, then attributing the first life to natural laws violates the very foundation of forensic science.
This is where the authors attempt to completely reframe the cultural narrative around this stuff. We're so used to hearing this debate framed as religion versus science. It's sort of a lingering hangover from the Scopes monkey trial.
Right.
But the text aggressively pushes back on that. They argue this is actually a debate between good science and bad science.
Yeah.
And to back that up, they pull quotes from some of the most famous proponents of Darwinism.
They do, and honestly, the quotes are remarkably candid. Richard Dawkins, perhaps the most vocal evolutionary biologist of our time, is quoted acknowledging that biology gives the appearance of having been designed for a purpose.
Which is a big admission.
It is. And Francis Crick, who co-discovered the structure of DNA, literally advised biologists that they must constantly remind themselves that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved.
Wait, let's just pause on that for a second. They are openly admitting that the raw biological data screams design, but they are actively telling each other to ignore that appearance. How does the text explain that cognitive dissonance? Why would brilliant scientists dismiss the obvious conclusion of their own observations?
The authors attribute it to an a priori commitment to materialism.
Materialism meaning the philosophical belief that absolutely nothing exists outside the physical material world. No mind, no spirit, no designer.
Exactly. The text features a really startling admission from Harvard evolutionary biologist Richard Lewontin. He essentially wrote that the scientific community is forced to tolerate unsubstantiated just-so stories in biology because of this absolute allegiance to materialism. He explicitly stated, "We cannot allow a divine foot in the door."
So, under this critique, the game is rigged from the start. The materialistic worldview dictates the conclusion before the evidence is even examined.
Precisely. If intelligence is disallowed by the rules of the paradigm, you have to find a naturalistic explanation, no matter how mathematically improbable it is.
And that leads to some massive biological stalemates highlighted in the text.
Oh yeah, the most glaring of those stalemates is the ultimate chicken and egg paradox at the cellular level.
I found this part fascinating. Walk us through it.
Okay, so to produce DNA, the cell absolutely needs proteins. Proteins act as the machinery to assemble the genetic code. But here's the paradox. To synthesize those necessary proteins, the cell absolutely relies on the specific instructions already encoded within the DNA.
So one literally cannot exist without the other already functioning.
Right. It's a closed loop that purely unguided step-by-step evolutionary theories really struggle to account for. And the mathematical odds of both spontaneously forming at the exact same time are so infinitesimally small that it drove some top-tier secular scientists to a pretty wild alternative.
Which brings us to panspermia.
Yes. What's fascinating here is that prominent scientists like Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe looked at the staggering improbability of life arising naturally on Earth and suggested that perhaps intelligent extraterrestrial aliens seeded the first life here.
I love that detail because it's such a massive concession. As the text argues, even the panspermia theory is a fundamental admission by secular scientists that the complexity of life requires an intelligent cause.
They just prefer an alien intelligence over a divine one.
Exactly. But as the authors quickly note, panspermia doesn't solve the origin of life at all, it just relocates it. You still have to answer the question, who designed the highly complex aliens?
It just pushes the problem back a step. Now, a very common counterargument to all of this complexity is the invocation of deep time.
Right. Given enough, billions of years.
Yeah, the Darwinist model relies heavily on the idea that given billions of years, even the most improbable events become inevitable. Time is viewed as the magic wand that makes the impossible possible.
But the authors dismantled that idea using a really great analogy about confetti. Let's say you take an airplane 1,000 feet up into the air and dump a massive payload of red, white, and blue confetti out the back.
Okay.
What are the chances that natural laws, gravity, wind currents, air resistance, are going to assemble those pieces of paper into a perfectly organized American flag on the lawn below?
Zero.
Exactly. The chances are zero. The natural laws will just randomize the confetti.
And the critical point here is understanding why adding more time doesn't help. If you say, let's give natural laws more time to work, and you take the plane up to 10,000 feet, you haven't improved the odds.
Not at all.
You've actually made them infinitely worse. This is driven by the second law of thermodynamics, which dictates that in a closed system, nature moves toward entropy, toward disorder and chaos, not order and complexity. Applying unguided energy over a longer period of time without an organizing mechanism just scatters the confetti further.
So time is actually the enemy of design, not its creator.
Exactly.
And what about the other word that gets thrown around constantly? Chance. People will look at the origin of life and say, well, it was a 1 in a trillion cosmic lottery ticket. It happened by chance.
The text offers a very sharp philosophical critique of that phrasing. Chance is not a physical force. It has no causal power whatsoever.
It's just a concept.
Right. When you flip a coin, chance doesn't physically grab the coin in midair and force it to land on heads. The outcome is determined by the intelligent force of the thumb flipping it, the mass of the coin, wind resistance, the surface it lands on, and gravity.
So when we say something happened by chance, we aren't identifying a cause at all. We are just using a placeholder word to cover up our own ignorance of what the actual variables were.
Exactly the argument. To say life arose by chance is scientifically meaningless under this framework. It's simply an admission that we do not know the mechanism. And this brings the authors to their most sweeping fundamental critique, the absolute philosophical collapse of materialism itself.
They argue that science doesn't sit at the top of the intellectual food chain. Science is actually a slave to philosophy.
To illustrate this, the text highlights a famous debate between the philosopher William Lane Craig and a staunch Darwinist named Peter Atkins.
Right. Atkins took the position that science is the ultimate tool and can account for everything in the known world.
But Craig completely dismantled that by listing 5 massive domains of human reality that are completely rational to believe, but that the scientific method literally cannot prove.
Let's pull those 5 apart because they really expose the limits of the materialistic worldview.
Yeah. First, Craig points out that science cannot prove mathematics and logic. Why? Because the scientific method has to presuppose that math and logic already work just to conduct an experiment. You can't use science to prove the tools it relies on.
That makes total sense. And second, it cannot prove metaphysical truth, like the existence of other minds besides your own, or that the external world isn't just a simulation.
Third, and this is a big one, science cannot prove ethical judgments.
Right.
You can use biology and physics to explain exactly how the chemical gas cyclone B affects the human respiratory system.
But you cannot use the scientific method to prove that the Nazis were morally evil for using it. Science gives you data. It doesn't give you morality.
Exactly. Fourth, science cannot prove aesthetic judgments about beauty. And fifth, in a brilliant bit of irony, science cannot even prove science itself.
The belief that the scientific method is the best way to discover objective truth about the universe is, in itself, a philosophical belief. You cannot empirically test the scientific method without using the scientific method.
It's circular. The authors use this to argue that the foundation of the Darwinist worldview is totally fractured. If materialism is true, then only physical matter exists. But life is clearly more than just a collection of materials.
The text makes a really stark observation here. A recently deceased body and a living body sitting in the same room have the exact same chemical makeup.
The exact same carbon, water, and calcium.
But one is fundamentally missing the immaterial property of life.
Furthermore, under strict materialism, human thoughts, logic, and emotions are nothing more than chemical reactions occurring in the brain. But you cannot isolate love in a test tube. You cannot find the atomic weight of a logical deduction.
And this leads to a devastating paradox for the materialist. If our mental processes are just blind chemical reactions responding to environmental stimuli, we have absolutely no rational basis for trusting that any of our thoughts are objectively true.
Chemicals don't reason, they just react.
So if a strict materialist says, my theory of evolution is objectively true, their own worldview dictates that their statement is just a biochemical fizzing in their brain, no more meaningful than a stomachache.
The philosophy just consumes itself.
It really does, and the text provides a phenomenal real-world example of this contradiction playing out in a boardroom. It's the story of Pete Bacino consulting for the Georgia Department of Education. I love how he sets the trap here.
It's masterful. He's sitting on a curriculum committee, and they are drafting psychology standards. Pete notices they don't have a working definition for human personhood, so he proposes a standard that defines human uniqueness through 5 immaterial concepts.
Conceptual thought, free will, ethical responsibility, moral accountability, and inalienable rights.
Right. And sitting right across from him is a very vocal atheist educator who clearly operates from a materialist worldview, and she immediately gears up to strike his standard down.
But before she can launch into her argument, Pete pauses the room and says, if anyone disagrees with this standard, watch what they have to do.
He corners her using her own impending actions. He points out that to argue against his standard, she must engage him in conceptual thought. She must exercise her free will to speak up.
She must operate under the belief that her position is ethically right and his is wrong. She is holding him morally accountable to teach what she views as the truth, and she is exercising her fundamental right to dissent.
By simply opening her mouth to debate him, she relies on every single immaterial concept on his list to make her argument intelligible.
It completely exposes how materialistic worldviews constantly have to borrow from theistic, immaterial concepts just to function in the real world. You can't claim we are just meat machines while simultaneously demanding that we are morally obligated to respect your logical arguments.
You can't have it both ways. So how do the authors synthesize all of these distinct arguments? From DNA to thermodynamics, from forensics to philosophy.
They bring it all together using the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle box top.
Right, the box top.
Yeah. When you dump 1,000 puzzle pieces onto a table, they mean nothing on their own. You completely rely on the picture on the box top to provide the context for where those pieces fit.
If you are accidentally looking at the wrong box top, you're going to completely misinterpret the shapes and colors of the pieces in your hand.
And the text uses a pretty intense, jarring example to show how context dictates interpretation.
They do. They ask the reader to imagine being told, without any context, that a man just violently slashed a woman's stomach open with a knife.
Your immediate logical interpretation of that data is horror. You assume a brutal crime has occurred.
But then the context is provided. The man is a skilled surgeon in a hospital delivery room. The baby's heart rate is dropping, and he is performing a life-saving emergency C-section.
The physical action, the raw data, is exactly the same. But the correct context completely reverses your interpretation of the evidence. You go from seeing a monster to seeing a hero.
And the authors argue that a theistic universe, a reality that includes an intelligent designer, is the correct box top for human existence.
If you force yourself to use the materialistic box top, you look at the 1,000 encyclopedias of specified complexity inside DNA, and you have to interpret it as a blind accident, even though that defies everything we know about how information is generated.
You have to view your own consciousness an illusion. But if you use the theistic box top, the incredible complexity of biology, the existence of objective logic, and our innate sense of morality all snap perfectly into place.
It's a really powerful way to visualize worldviews. And as we wrap up this deep dive, it's worth turning that lens inward. Every single one of you listening right now operates with a box top.
We all do.
We all filter data through our underlying philosophies. It's worth asking yourself, how often do your preconceived views dictate how you interpret the raw data of your life? Are you ever forcing the puzzle pieces of your career, your relationships, or your reading of the world to fit a picture that might be fundamentally flawed?
It's an uncomfortable but absolutely necessary exercise in critical thinking.
It really is. And the text leaves us with one final, lingering challenge to the Darwinian framework that I want you to mull over today. It goes back to that critique of reason. If our human brains and our ability to use logic are strictly the end products of a mindless, unguided evolutionary process built absolutely and solely for biological survival.
On what grounds can we ever trust our own logic when we try to discover objective truth about the universe?
After all, survival does not always require the truth.
That is a heavy, profound question to ponder the next time you find yourself staring at a bowl of alphabet cereal.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a profoundly challenging set of sources. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will catch you on the next one.